Welcome to Muhlenberg College 2021 annual celebration of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is lovingly called by many MLK. We acknowledge his contributions to Black liberation and his commitment to the inclusion of marginalized populations in every facet of the human experience. MLK embodied a fierce spirit, a steadfast resolve, and a willingness to sacrifice his life for the good of his people. His inspiration can be attributed to his family, his faith, his friends, and the hundreds of thousands of freedom fighters that came before him. His legacy lives on in us. I have asked community members of Muhlenberg College to share the impact of MLK's life and legacy on their life and their profession. I hope that you will join us in solidarity and lift your voice for justice, for diversity, for inclusion, and for equity. Be well, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Today we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On this day, we honor the contributions of Dr. King and recommit ourselves to the ongoing work of expanding equality and justice in our country and across the world. We especially feel the gravity of this day. In a year that has illuminated gross inequalities across public health during a pandemic, a racial reckoning born of systematic difference in the value of Black and white lives, and an assault on our nation's capital by a mob intent on subverting democracy, displaying symbols of hate and oppression. But at the same time, on this day, we can feel the tide turning. We sense a new awakening. Certainly, we have much to do to put the world right. But as Dr. King exhorted us in his 1964 Nobel Prize lecture, with patient and firm determination, we will press on until every valley of despair is exalted to new peaks of hope, until every mountain of pride and irrationality is made low by the leveling process of humility and compassion, until the rough places of injustice are transformed into a smooth plane of equality of opportunity, and until the crooked places of prejudice are transformed by the straightening process of bright-eyed wisdom.
Hi everyone, I am Dr. Cusick and I am honored to be here with you all today, virtually celebrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I wrote down my thoughts, and some of you may have already read them in the email that accompanies this video, but I wanted to offer some of them in video format as well. So here are some of the things that are on my heart and my mind today. To my Muhlenberg community, while this day honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is always an apt time for celebrating the gifts Black communities have given the world and reflecting upon both the legacy and contemporary reverberations of systemic racism, this year, that reflection feels particularly urgent and particularly difficult. Violent chaos is swirling all around us, and much of it is rooted in the racial inequity that Dr. King and countless others dedicated their lives to fighting. Racial inequity that was founded upon a hatred so intense that it murdered Dr. King and many other freedom fighters. As we reflect upon the legacies of Dr. King and those who fought with him, we are forced to grapple with the reality that 2020 brought more killings of Black Americans and violence against peaceful protesters who challenged those murders. Then, 2021 began with racist attacks on the Capitol. In short, this MLK Day, there is much weighing on our collective hearts and minds as we try to find a way forward. I am speaking today on behalf of the Africana Studies program, not to dismiss the pain and heaviness we are feeling, but to stand in solidarity with all of you as we work to honor Dr. King's legacy by refusing to let the hatred, racism, and injustice outshine our light. As we think about the racist actions and rhetoric that have been at the center of recent events, it is easy to become overwhelmed. While it is crucial that we do not downplay the pervasiveness of racism and its fatal repercussions, it is also crucial that we understand that the proponents of racism often spew their hatred because they sense that change is coming. History has shown us that, many times, white supremacy lashes out when it worries its position in power is coming to an end. Dr. King was assassinated for his work toward eradicating white supremacy in all of its violent forms, and he was neither the first nor the last person to be killed for trying to usher in a just world. I mention this history to emphasize the underlying truth within it. We are on the cusp of changing the world again, and that knowledge terrifies those who want the current hierarchies to remain in place. We cannot and will not let the current systems of injustice stand. We can and will bring in a new day, a day of justice, equity, and beauty. On this day, honoring Dr. King and all who fought with him, as we continue to fight for the change we will successfully create, remember that we come from a tradition of resilience and strength, from a lineage of people who have been fighting for centuries. While there is far to go, our ancestors have been successful on countless fronts. They fought a system that enslaved them, a system that told them they weren't human, and that spread the lie that they didn't deserve joy, success, or freedom. And yet, they created all three. We are here because they fought and others fought alongside them. Together, we will keep building upon the foundation they gave us. In the meantime, I hope that this video will bring you comfort, hope, and a reminder that your Muhlenberg community is by your side. As a community, we stand together, and we stand on the shoulders of all who came before us, including those whose names we know, such as Dr. King, and those whose names we might never learn, but whose work still paved the way for us to create an entirely new, equitable, joyful world that will move from our imaginations into our lived realities. In the moments when it seems that just world is once again beyond our grasp, remember that those moments are, in fact, when it is within reach. On the days that feel the darkest, remember that those who support the darkness of injustice are afraid of the dawn of justice we are bringing, a dawn that has been centuries in the making, and a dawn that will be here to stay.
Hi everyone, how are we all doing today? Good. All right, great. Thank you so much for being here today. We truly appreciate it. Thank you. I am truly honored and grateful to be here with you all on such a special day. But first, I would like to bring awareness to the fact that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not the only person who made such a difference. There were many people that worked with him, before him, and after him. With that being said, I would like to honor Malcolm X, Angela Davis, Maya Angelou, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, John Lewis, Rosa Parks, the Black Panther Party of which was founded by Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, and many more who have helped progress Black liberation. Lastly, a huge shout out to the names that were erased from history due to having conflicting identities, such as being a Black 16-year-old pregnant woman like Claudette Colvin, who was actually the first Rosa Parks, or being a gay Black man like Bernard Rustin, Dr. Martin Luther King's right-hand man who was the main organizer for the March on Washington. Miss Colvin and Mr. Rustin had to hide from the spotlight because being Black was already seen as too much. As said amongst people at the time, having intersecting identities would not have done the civil rights movement any good because it would not have been taken as seriously. I am so grateful to be the president of the Black Student Association. We, as an executive board, of which includes Haley Petrus, vice president, Imani Zoria, secretary, Retta Washington, treasurer, Skia Butler, director of public relations, and Quentin Clark, representative, along with our advisor, Dr. Emanuela Cusick, host events catered towards awareness, allyship, and activism. Our goal is to educate those who are unaware of our history. and how it has affected our country, but we also like to provide insight to allies by inviting guest speakers to spread wisdom on allyship and activism. As a group, we like to be an outlet for Black students who feel marginalized or left out due to attending a predominantly white institution. We love to spread joy, laughter, and have a good time. We, as BSA, invite all non-Black students to join us to have fun, stand with us in solidarity, and to be unified as the beautiful and wonderful people that we all are. This unification is not just any coincidence, though. It's actually the result of the great works of MLK and many others. MLK looked fear in its eyes and continued to push on despite what was to come. So many Black people had lost hope and thought that Black and white people would never coexist. They thought that nothing was going to change. They thought that the darkness of their skin would leave them in the dark, never to see the light where the lightness of the white skin lived. Freedom. That's all they wanted was freedom. Dr. Martin Luther King lived in that darkness due to the darkness of his complexion, but he provided an optimistic reality as if he lived in the skin of a white person who provided the light at the end of the tunnel, freedom. He allowed the people to dream, to see a future that treated them and loved them unconditionally. He was the faith for those who lost hope, and that's all they needed to continue the fight. They just needed someone to believe in them and truly see them for who they were. With great thanks, I am here today to honor the wonderful and fantastic Martin Luther King Jr. for all that he has done for us as Black people and for those to come in the future. Thank you all in the audience for being here, for supporting us, and just for everything. You all are very special. I truly appreciate you. Stay safe, wear your masks, and remember, like the great John Lewis once said, get in good trouble. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Hello, my name is Zaire Carter, president of the Men of Color Network, and today is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And one cannot help but to reflect on the legacy of not just Dr. King and all that he stood for, but also all of those that came before him and after him, and that have fought and continue to fight for civil rights, equality, and justice. The Men of Color Network provides a unique space for students on campus to connect with one another, to learn from each other and our mentors, and to connect with other leaders within the Allentown community in order to uplift and amplify our voices. You know, Dr. King had such a great capacity to be able to inspire and to uplift those. And one of his most foundational elements that guided him throughout the entire civil rights movement was nonviolence. But it was also hope. Hope is such a funny word, I think. I think what Dr. King was able to illuminate was that there is hope in everything, even in hopelessness. And he was able to inspire people to keep fighting and to keep going. He had a great capacity to give hope to those, even when they were going through their darkest moments. And yet again, we find ourselves, this country, again at a dark moment. And what he always encouraged people was to keep going. And there is one particular quote that I'd like to share with you. He said, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward." And so, in the chaos of today's world, I implore all of us to heed his words and to keep moving forward. Thank you.
Hello, beautiful souls. My name is Randall Anthony Smith, and I'm an assistant professor of Black Dance and Choreography in the Department of Theater and Dance at Muhlenberg College. And I have the honor, blessing, and pleasure of coming to you from my heart, my mind, my spirit, and my body. And so one of the things that I feel is so important, not just now, given where we have been since 2020, coming into 2021, seeing the effects of this nation's history transcend into the 21st century, it often feels like, when is this going to end? How long? How long will I have to wait? How long will I have to fight? How long will I have to do any of this to get to a place of peace and prosperity, love, joy, excitement, and the kind of sharing where you're not worried about who's behind you, but you're more focused on what's in front of you, the present. And to me, the ways in which our worlds collide personally, interpersonally, interculturally, intersocially, it amazes me how the moments in our life on a continuum, but also from day to day, are no coincidence. I would love to think that we could live in a world where there's no turmoil, but the reality is, for me, and something that I have learned to accept, but also find ways to detach myself from, is difference is not bad. Difference is really good. But difference is also the reason why we have conflict and tension in our own world and in the worlds that we collide with on a daily, monthly, yearly, decade to decade, century to century, era to era. That is just a part of our human existence. But there are ways that we can get beyond that conflict and tension, that discord. And that is through the action of love, not the philosophy, not the school, not the perceptions of love, but the action. It takes work. It takes effort. And guess what? We have so much time to figure out how to let that action be the way that we can heal, we can live and grow together and find better solutions to deal with that conflict and tension. And one of the most prolific souls that's still with us today and will never go away. The flesh is gone, but the energy of that spirit is with us, even as I speak, not just in this month, not just in a day, but every day. That cellular vessel, that energetic vibrancy, and the space that gives us hope and faith to get through our day and live through each moment, no matter how hard it is or no matter how amazing it is. That is what gives us purpose. And so the reality is, as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. says in one of his many beautiful speeches and call for us to really listen and really respond, but in a way that requires no intelligence, that requires no emotion, but does require us to get in touch with a part of ourselves we have left in the shadows, and that is the spirit. And this speech, for many of you that may or may not know, has been entitled How Long, Not Long. And it comes from a time where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is speaking to the public at the state capitol in Montgomery, Alabama, which is a state that I was cultured and raised in, on top of my home state of California. And this is, the speech is delivered as the culmination, as the kind of respite from the Selma to Montgomery March. And you don't need to know all of this history, but it might entice you to do a little bit of digging as a way of connecting. And the speech really goes into some territories that I feel speak to a lot of us, not all of us, but speak to a lot of us, but gives us a reason to connect because of this very moment. How long? Not long. Because no lie can live forever. How long? Not long. Because you shall reap what you sow. How long? Not long. And where this moment comes is obviously in response to many of the acts of the time of the civil rights era. But it also speaks to something that has lived before that time, that is still living in this time and will live forever. And yet, this question, how long? It is a question we have been asking ourselves as human beings for quite some time. But the reality is, when we're in the present, it's not long. It's not long that we will have to wait for the freedoms that we deserve. It's not long that we will have to wait for those injustices to become justified and dealt with humanely. And there are many inequities that happen to a lot of us, to many of us, and I will argue to all of us. But it's not how we can be divided, but it's how we can come together, knowing that we are all suffering in some way, shape, or form. Despite what your feelings may be, despite what you may know, despite where you come from, we all suffer. When one of us suffers, we all suffer. So this question of how long becomes something that is much larger than the call to action. And by affirming not long and understanding that the lies that we tell ourselves about our own self and each other, they cannot live, because the light in all of us will continue to shine. There will always be a ray of hope. There will always be a person who provides sanction. They cannot do all the work on their own, but that one person becomes a catalyst to another. And we do this for each other a lot and don't even realize it. And so one of the things that I am quite aware of in my own spirit and in my own flesh, that although this may seem like a never-ending story, battle, whatever you want to call it, that is the truth. And so if we can recognize that, it won't be long before we can start to come together to find real, tangible, juicy, loving solutions that will empower us, that will free us, and will allow us to come together as we should, as the beautiful human beings that we are, and the differences that we are born with. We don't get to choose the bodies that we're born into, but we do get to choose how we respond. We do get to choose how we relate. We do get to choose light, love, and happiness.
Hello everyone, my name is Crystal Hall and I am the president of the Destiny Women of Color Association. DWCA strives to honor Dr. King's dream by believing in the equality and inclusion for all women of color in all spaces at all times. Dr. King says, life's most urgent and persistent question is, what are you doing for others? The women of DWCA strives to empower and support women of color throughout various events and programs on campus and throughout the Allentown community. Our programs and events are open and available for all women of color to be in dialogue with one another, but our purpose is specifically for the betterment and upliftment of women of color. Dr. King also says, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. DWCA stands in solidarity with all the other affinity groups under multicultural life. We believe that together we can drive out the darkness that tries to silence marginalized voices. I, Crystal Hall, vow to stand in solidarity and enmity with Dr. King's dream.
I, Mercy Olajobi, vow to stand in hope and unanimity of Dr. King's dream.
I, Yana, vow to stand in hope and unanimity with Dr. King's dream.
I, Janice Vega, vow to continue to stand in hope and unity with Dr. King's dream.
I, Kelsey O. Casimir, vow to continue to stand in hope and unanimity with Dr. King's dream.
Hi Muhlenberg, and happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. My name is Dr. Brooke Vick, and I am the Associate Provost for Faculty and Diversity Initiatives here at Muhlenberg. Though I wish I could spend this day with you reflecting on the legacy of Dr. King and encouraging each other to follow in his footsteps in person, I'm honored to be invited to share a few thoughts with you to honor our collective moment. And this is a moment that in some ways is unlike any other most of us have experienced in our lifetimes, one that is marked by racial and political violence, a sweeping global pandemic, and deep divisions throughout our country, all of which have resulted in a shared experience of instability, uncertainty, and loss. With these circumstances as a backdrop, it can be difficult to find hope in the promise of change that Dr. King organized, wrote, marched, and died for, particularly when the path toward justice is often one in which progress is immediately followed by evidence of its opposite. During the spring of 2020, we could derive hope from the global uprising against racial injustice, the largest movement for justice for Black people since the Civil Rights Movement. And then immediately we're devastated when justice for those who perpetrate violence against Black bodies is denied. We may have felt hope for racial justice when we elected the first Black and Asian woman to the vice presidency, only to then experience fear and despair when we saw those who oppose racial equity and justice storm the U.S. Capitol building to silence the voices of so many Black voters. There is no doubt that on Dr. King's journey toward racial equity and progress, he experienced loss and defeat too. He and his colleagues were rejected, ridiculed, dismissed, and jailed. He led movements forward only to be beaten backwards soon afterward. We've experienced similar ups and downs in our march toward equity, electing our first Black president of the United States only to then elect one who is supported by white supremacist groups. Coming back from those blows backward is hard work. It's hard to see a way forward, to plan, to put in the work, to risk failing again. And it hurts. It hurts to know that there are those who mean to thwart racial justice, who mean to reject and even eliminate our very lives. But if we are to spend this Martin Luther King Day reflecting on Dr. King's work and his vision, we must remember him as someone who did not shy away from that risk, who did not shy away from failure, who did not shy away from hurt. Perhaps most importantly, he didn't shy away from believing that change was possible. And so he kept on. He plainly identified those he thought were complicit in perpetuating racial and economic inequality, and he asked more of them, knowing his message would likely be met with defensiveness, rejection, or violence. He held those in power accountable while welcoming them into the movement, should they choose to be on the right side of history. And he did all of this with so many others while experiencing frustration, anger, pain, and sadness, the same way we all do when we faced obstacles in our progress toward racial justice. Though it may seem somehow blasphemous to suggest that the feelings and frustrations we experience in the face of racial injustice are similar to Dr. King's experiences, I think it's important to help us remember that though Dr. King is and always will be a giant of the civil rights movement, a downright superhero to many of us, he was also a young man, a husband, a father, a church leader, a student, and a scholar, like many of us are or will soon be. And I hadn't really thought about this until a few years ago when I had the honor of meeting Diane Nash, a freedom writer and a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, alongside the late Representative John Lewis. When I got up the courage to talk to her one-on-one and thank her for the life that I live today, she said that she and her peers who helped lead the civil rights movement were, quote, no one special. They were just kids, students who saw a problem that needed to be changed. She urged us not to imagine that the people who did this work before, whose shoulders we stand on in our movement toward racial justice, were unique, or that they were some kind of superheroes. They, Ms. Nash said, were us. They are us. And that, to me, is a legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and all of his peers who led the civil rights movements. They didn't wait for someone to come along and be the one to fix the problem they saw. They believed that they could be the ones to say enough and mean it. They decided that they were worth fighting for, despite so many societal messages to the contrary. So on this Martin Luther King Day, I want to say to you, my friends in the Muhlenberg community, you are worth fighting for. We are worth fighting for. And so we will. We will carry on together in this fight, in his memory,